So today we're going to talk about criminal defense attorneys. If you are ever arrested or honestly even questioned with respect to a criminal offense, I strongly encourage you to request an attorney. Having an attorney during this process is absolutely invaluable. So you've probably seen TV shows, anything from something non-fictional like Cops to Law and Order or any other sort of crime drama, or even something like Reno 911. You will hear police tell criminal suspects or people that they're arresting that they have a right to an attorney, and if they cannot afford one will be provided for them. That is because of the Sixth Amendment. According to the Sixth Amendment, you have a right to counsel in a criminal proceeding, and this relates to both federal criminal proceedings and state criminal proceedings. The way the Supreme Court has interpreted the Sixth Amendment is that if you cannot actually afford a criminal defense attorney, then the government is obligated to pay for one on your behalf. So what we talk about when we talk about criminal defense attorneys is a concept called indigency. Indigency basically just means that you're poor. And in Texas, the general definition is that if you make more than $49,200 per year, you are expected to hire your own private attorney. If you make less than $49,200 per year, you're considered indigent, which means that the government has to provide an attorney for you. That is sort of a general benchmark. In reality, the way the process works is that if you believe you are entitled to an attorney, that you cannot afford one yourself, you will be asked a number of questions. There's a form that you fill out, and the form asks you about all of your sources of income, the value of all of your property and assets, everything from jewelry to land to cars to checking accounts, to 401ks, everything. And then it also asks for your monthly expenses. So how much you have to pay for childcare, how much you have to pay for education, for housing, etc. And those figures are then used to determine whether or not you have the resources that you could use to apply or to hire your own attorney. In Denton County, they have a pretty straightforward process for determining eligibility. If you are either incarcerated, meaning you're already in jail, or if you're eligible for any sort of means-tested government program like food stamps, Medicaid, things like that, then you are automatically considered eligible for a public defender. In addition, even if neither one of those qualifications is met, if that form that you fill out indicates that your net income is below 125% of the federal poverty guidelines, then you are also considered indigent and will receive a public defender. So this is really valuable because private attorneys cost a lot of money. So criminal defense attorneys typically work under one of two different approaches. It's important to note, remember we talked about contingency fee lawyers when we talked about torts and civil law. Criminal defense attorneys cannot work on a contingency fee basis. They can't, for example, charge you more if you are acquitted. Instead, you have to negotiate the price at the beginning of the process, and then that is what you will pay no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome of the trial is. Some criminal defense attorneys charge a flat fee. So, for example, if you approach a criminal defense attorney and you say, here's what I've been charged with, it's a misdemeanor, the attorney may look at that and say, okay, well, given the complexity of this particular case and my own sort of the value of my time, I'm going to charge you $2,000 to represent you for this misdemeanor, but it'll be $3,000 if we end up going to trial. Typically, there's sort of a tiered approach where you're going to pay a little bit more if you go to trial. In the state of Texas, the misdemeanor flat rate for attorneys ranges typically from about $1,500 to $3,500. If you go to trial, it's really more between $3,000 and $5,000. With a felony, that flat rate may be much, much higher, $10,000, $20,000, even more. In a capital murder case, for example, the flat rate would be way more than that. It would probably be over $100,000. Some private criminal defense attorneys, instead of charging a flat fee, they will actually just charge an hourly rate. So the disadvantage is that if the case ends up being very complex, you may pay a whole lot more than you were expecting. On the other hand, if the case ends up resolving more quickly, you're on the hook for less money. So, there's sort of there's some pros and cons with the hourly fee. Criminal defense attorneys, their hourly fee varies considerably based on their own experience and sort of the complexity and difficulty of your case. Is this going to require the attorney to learn about a new crime, one that they've never dealt with before, for example? Or is this going to be fairly routine for them? And those hourly rates, again, in Texas, are going to vary anywhere from about $100 an hour for a brand new lawyer up to about $750 an hour for an attorney who is really well established and has a strong record of success. The average is about $300 per hour. Now that again is an hourly rate, and you have to remember that your attorney is going to be with you during questioning. Your attorney is going to be engaged in their own investigation of the facts surrounding your case. They're going to be doing legal research. They're going to be bringing motions about evidence on your behalf. And then eventually, potentially they're going to be going to trial for you. So, even a relatively straightforward case may involve, 20, 30, 40 hours of work from an attorney. So you can imagine that this starts to rack up pretty quickly. As I mentioned before, in a 1963 case called Gideon versus Wainwright, the Supreme Court held that the Sixth Amendment right to counsel means that states have to provide representation to criminal defendants who are too poor to pay for their own lawyer. The way in which states provide this representation varies a lot. There are a number of different models for providing indigent legal defense. One is for a community to have a full-time public defender office. So it's sort of like a law firm in the sense that there are attorneys who work for this entity. It's all that they do, and all that they do is represent indigent criminal defense defendants. So you may have, there are attorneys for whom this is their entire career. Other communities, though, take a different approach. One is to offer what they call a part-time public defender contract. So what this means is that if you, let's say you have your own private practice, you're a defense attorney, or maybe you even have a family law practice, and you want to make some additional money on the side, you may sign up for the public defender contract, and then you're sort of on call. Your ability to turn down cases is limited. And under this system, you either receive a fixed fee, like they pay you, $30,000 a year, and they expect that about half of your time is going to be spent as a public defender, or they may provide you a fee per case. But again, the idea is that this is a substantial chunk of your business. And if you have a contract and the government calls on you to represent somebody, you will almost always have to say yes. The third major option is what's called a wheel system. This is actually what Denton County uses. On the wheel system, if you are an attorney in town and you would like to make some additional money, you can basically go down to the courthouse and ask to be put on a list. And the judges in the courthouse will cycle through that list, and when your name comes up and there's a client that needs representation, you will be given the opportunity to represent that person. The assumption is, again, that generally you will take those cases when they are offered to you, but there are circumstances in which you can sort of get out of a case. Particularly if you are, for example, really overwhelmed with other cases, you may take your name off of the wheel for a while and then go back on. So that's sort of the way the process works. So what do we pay public defenders? Federal public defenders tend to make a fairly decent amount of money. There are a lot of federal public defender offices that are full-time public defender offices where you have attorneys who work for the federal public defender's office. They represent a lot of federal defendants, and that is all that they do. There are, however, also what we call federal panel attorneys. These are like the attorneys that are on the wheel. And the compensation in the federal system for these panel attorneys, for the attorneys who kind of take cases on an ad hoc basis, they make $148 an hour for non-capital cases. The rate for capital cases is higher. But there's a maximum payment of $11,500 for a felony case. So it's conceivable that as a federal panel attorney, you may take a case and end up working 100 hours. You're not going to get $14,800 from the federal government. You're going to get $11,500. So that's about 77 hours. Anything you work beyond that is effectively not compensated. In Denton County, if you work a misdemeanor case in Denton County, you're making way less. A misdemeanor case in Denton County, the maximum hourly compensation is $100 an hour. So it ranges anywhere from $75 to $100 an hour. That includes both out-of-court time, trial time, and appeal time, with $2,000 max for the trial and an additional $2,000 maximum for an appeal. So effectively, if you are a Denton County public defender and you take on a misdemeanor case, absolutely the most you can expect to get paid for that case is $4,000. No matter how many hours it takes you. The average salary for a full-time public defender in the state of Texas is $53,512. Again, this is for a full-time public defender, not someone who's working on the wheel, not somebody who has a part-time contract, but a full-time public defender. So this is their only source of income. This is their average salary in Texas. You will recall when we talked about lawyers and law school and sort of what it costs to go to law school, we talked about what attorneys make when they come out of law school, and $53,000 is about average for a brand new lawyer. So the notion that this is the average for all full-time public defenders, what that tells you is that they're making a lot less than other attorneys. Because this is their average no matter how long they've worked, whereas this $53,000 is kind of an average for brand new attorneys coming out of law school. So the result of this, or the reason that this matters so much, is that the way in which we finance public defenders has implications for the way in which they work. To the extent that we do not pay public defenders very much money, we may not be getting the very best attorneys entering into the world of public defense. That's not necessarily true. A lot of people who choose to be public defenders do so because they are true believers in the importance of criminal defense work. They are true believers in justice and equal access to the courts, and they're doing it more on principle than they are in order to make money. But nevertheless, if you are coming out of law school and you have $200,000 in student loan debt, and you have a choice between a job at a big law firm making $170,000 a year, or a job as a brand new public defender making $40,000 a year, you might pick the big firm job if you can actually do that. The way in which we finance public defenders or public defense work also has implications for the way in which you handle a case. If you are receiving money on a per case basis, then you have an incentive to work as few hours as possible. If you're going to get $3,000 to represent Joe, and it doesn't matter how many hours you work, you obviously want to work fewer hours for the $3,000, right? You'd rather work 20 hours for $3,000 than 40 hours for $3,000. On the other hand, if you get paid by the hour, you actually have an incentive to work as many hours as you can on a case. And maybe you have an incentive then to spend time doing things that aren't really particularly efficient or productive, just so that you can kind of pad your bills. So again, you can imagine that this question of how we pay for our public defenders has implications for the way in which they do their work and the kind of attorneys that we attract.